Welcome, fellow bookworms, to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and today we have my April wrap-up. I'm pretty happy with how April went. It started off really rough, and then kind of sorted itself out, and it ended okay. So, I did end up reading 16 books. I originally had 11 prompts. That's my game prompts plus my genre-a-thon. I did add on 7 extras. 2 of those, though, kind of replaced a couple of the other books, so we'll get into all that as we go. And I did have 4 rollovers. One of those I'm counting as read, and I'll explain why, even though I didn't fully finish it. And it will be continuing to roll over, but we'll get into that as well. So 16 books was really good. That's a little bit higher than my average. Not much, but a little bit higher. So I'm really happy with that. I did end up reading 5,429 pages. 13 of those were physical, 2 digital, and 1 audio, which the audio equaled 2 hours and 28 minutes. It was a really short book. Fiction, I had 15 fiction and only 1 nonfiction. I did not have any rereads. My top moves this month were emotional, adventurous, and dark. My genres, again, these kind of overlap, were 6 fantasy, 4 historical, 3 classics, 3 young adult, 2 middle grade, 2 literary, 2 contemporary, 1 speculative, 1 thriller, 1 romance, 1 religion, 1 mystery, 1 health, and 1 comics. And so yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it. I always start with the ones that I did not get to, and then kind of work my way up to my top reads of the month. And this is the first month where my top reads as far as star rating and my top 3 as far as impact actually line up for the most part. There's only one that deviates from that, but otherwise they match. So that's pretty cool. I haven't had that happen yet. Normally the ones I found more impactful I don't necessarily enjoy as much, and such. So that was really, really cool to see. So let's start with the ones we didn't get to. So first I have one of the extra books. So I did participate in Autism Acceptance Readathon, which was put on by MJ, I think Reads and Writes, I want to say, Chelsea Zhao, and The Reading Run. And I will leave all those channels linked down below, of course, so you can go check them out. And so basically, it was really, really easy. There was 4 prompts. You had a nonfiction prompt, you had a host recommendation prompt, you had an indie-owned voices prompt, and then you had intersectional voices. And that's the one I did not get to, is that last one. And I was going to read After Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. Even though this is the 3rd book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, I have not read the other 2, but I had found this one at a thrift store, and I figured I don't mind reading series out of order, and so I was going to pick this up. I just ran out of time, and I had some other books that I needed to prioritize. And so unfortunately I did not get to this one. I have read Talia Hibbert recently, and I do participate in Autism Reads, which is put on by Christine and an autistic reader, and each month we're reading a book that is written by an autistic author. And so I think it was January we read an indie published book by Talia Hibbert. So I do want to read this at some point. I would like to get the first 2 in the series, and if I happen to, I'll definitely read them in order. Otherwise, I'll just probably read this one out of order. But yeah, I did not get to this one, sadly, so it will go back on the shelf. Then we have 2 books from my game that I didn't get to. And the first one was for Pinocchio, and this was supposed to be a translated work. So this prompt will go back into the honey jar. And I was going to read My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I've heard such amazing things. I haven't heard a lot about the series, but when I have heard about it, really, really good, amazing things about it. And this is the Neapolitan series. I think it's translated from Italian, I want to say. And yeah, I just ran out of time, and so this one's going to be going back on the shelf. I'm not rolling it over. And the other one is a fail yet again. This was a bookworm, and it was physical TBR. So basically, this will go back in too. It would go back in regardless. And basically, I just I have all my unread books on a spreadsheet on my computer. I randomize a number, and this is the one that popped up, and that is One of Us is Lying by Karen and McManus. And unfortunately, I did not get to this. It's been a TBR fail before. And I know it's going to be super easy to read and such, but I just don't have a huge interest in this. And so it was kind of lower priority for me to get to. And I'm not going to roll this one over again. Hopefully one day I will get to it, but it was not the month of April. So those three I did not get to and are going back on the shelves. And then I had one more I did not get to, and that is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ning. And this was for the prompt of Through the Ages challenge. So this is another bookworm. And basically, I randomized a decade. I think I got 2016, so anytime between 2010 and 2020. This edition was published in 2020, but it was originally published in 2017. I have started it. I'm barely in it. I only read 40 pages last night. But this is one I'm using for my like novice path for Aurelium and such, and so I do need to get this read regardless, and so I have started it. I'm not holding myself to the I need to read it before I start anything else. I've actually also already read another book. It's May 2nd when I'm filming this, and that's because I'm participating in Escape the Readathon, which is put on by Lexi at, I think it's Reading with Lexi. And yeah, so there's prompts and it's team based, and you're trying to fit prompts so you can move through and escape the readathon. And so my thing was I need to at least start it and read a little bit each day while I'm reading other books for the readathon. And so that's kind of what I did last night. I read a book. It was fairly short and easy to read, so I read that. And then I started this at bedtime. So this will probably be like my bedtime book, and I'll read it and focus on books for the readathon throughout the day. So that one is rolling over. So there is that. Excuse me, I've been all snuffly. My allergies are kicking my butt. So, okay. So then we actually did have 2 DNFs this month. And these were actually rollovers from the previous month. I had started one, but I'd barely gotten into it. And then I read a little bit more and was like, yeah, this is definitely not for me. And so these were for my ABC title challenge. And so I did replace them. And so, like I said, 2 of the extras were actually replacing these 2 books because I still needed to fulfill my ABC title challenge. And in order to progress in that, because I'm reading them in order, I needed to have these letters fulfilled. So first I DNF'd Going Local by Jamie Harrison. It wasn't horrible. It's like a little murder cozy mystery. And I think I read 36 pages of this, but the writing was done in the 90s, and I just wasn't getting into the story at all. I didn't particularly connect with the writing, and I was like, I'm struggling. I'm not going to force myself to read this. And so I went ahead and DNF'd it. I will be unhauling this one. Then we have my H author, and that was, or my H title, and that was How Hard Can It Be by Allison Pearson. I read about 50 pages of this, and I didn't realize it was like British humor, which is fine, but I was struggling. Like, it wasn't horrible, and I was a little bit intrigued, but I was struggling so hard to just read one page. And I read this over 2 days as well, thinking maybe the first day it was just me. And then I was like, nope, it's not just me. And to struggle to read one page, I was like, I'm not forcing myself through this whole book. I can't even get through a page. And I did make it through 50 pages, but it was an uphill battle. So I went ahead and DNF'd. Again, I will be unhauling that one. And so yeah, those are my 2 DNFs. I put those in my 1-star slot. I don't rate them on like Goodreads or anything like that. Since I didn't actually read them, I don't think that's fair, but for my purposes, they are 1 stars. I did have 1 2 stars, and this is the other kind of weird book. And so this has been my rollover since November, and that's the Iliad and the Odyssey. I finished the Iliad. I finally finished the Iliad, and so, that was a good portion of this book. And so I decided, I have this edition on both Storygraph and Goodreads, and so I can't like rate it separately on there. But for the purposes of my journal and such, I decided I wanted to rate them separately because I know I read the Odyssey in school and I know I enjoyed it, but I did not like the Iliad. It definitely painted a picture. Um, and I enjoyed the parts with the gods when they were kind of meddling, but otherwise it's so and so, son of so and so, and I already struggle with the names and keeping characters straight, and so all those extra names, like, I don't care who their father was. I get it's a product of the time. But, oh my goodness, and then it's all this, just basically a big battle, and just over and over and over again, and just, oh, the brains, like, the spear went through and their brains came out, or their guts came out, like, I did not like the Iliad. I'm glad I read it though. Like, I really am glad I read it. That way I kind of have a reference for it in my mind. But it was a struggle. So I ended up, the Iliad separate from this is 2 stars. And I think once I reread the Odyssey, because it's been, I was like late middle grade, early high school when I read it the first time. So I think when I do rate it on Goodreads or Storygraph, I'll probably go with whatever I'm going to rate the Odyssey, and just forget about the Iliad. But yeah, I made it through. It took me for 6 months to read the Iliad, but I did make it through. I persevered, and I'm happy. Like I said, it wasn't so bad that I was like, I don't want to read this. But it was a struggle to get through, so it only got 2 stars. But I'm glad it's done, and I can move on to the story I'm actually interested in reading. And that's only like 300 and something pages, but it's a little bit taller than a normal book. A little bit, well, it's about the same width, but it is like kind of dense to read. So that will take me some time. I doubt I'll finish it, within a month, but maybe in a couple months I can finish that one. Then let's see, we had 3 stars. The first one is for the prompt In the Woods, which this is the 3 bears from Goldilocks, so the prompt was In the Woods. And I ended up reading Wildwood by Colin, Meloy, and Carson, Ellis. I like the premise of this, and I like kind of the quirkiness, and basically you have the main character, Prue. Her little brother gets taken by this murder of crows, and there's these woods outside of, where are they at? Like Portland or something? Anyway, there's these woods, and they're called the Impassable Woods because nobody can get in them. And when people do go in, they don't come out. And so her brother gets taken into these woods. She's 12, so she goes into these woods to get her brother and this kid from school. They're not really friends at that point. He's a little bit of an outcast. Ends up following her in, and he's 12 as well. And there's these animals which are kind of humanized, and so they're talking animals, they wear clothes and such. And so basically you have 3 different parts of the woods. You have the Southwood, the Northwood, and the Wildwood. And there's this governess that got banished to the Wildwood who originally ruled Southwood. So she gets banished there, and she's basically trying to come back to power, essentially. And so Prue's just trying to find her little brother, but she kind of gets wrapped up. Her and her friend Curtis get wrapped up into these politics. So the premise of it was fine. The story was fun. It was just, there was some choices made that was a little weird for a middle grade. So right off the bat, Curtis, he gets drunk. And I had read some reviews, and I was thinking, oh, it's probably not that bad. These kids are 12, okay? And so it's like, you got a younger audience, but then you also have these characters that are that age. And so basically what he was trying to do is, this kid, the governess was trying to get information out of him. So she's trying to get him to loosen up a little bit and spill the beans, essentially. I think it could have been done without, oh, the governess, have more wine, have more wine, have more wine. The kid's 12. It did not fit with the demographic. So that was a little off-putting. And then there's a bunch of fighting. So there's a bunch of war. And there is some darker themes as well, which all in itself is fine for a middle grade. Like, I don't think middle grade doesn't necessarily need to be light and happy. Like, the darker theme is fine and such. And the fighting and the war is fine and such. And at one point, Curtis lights a canyon, which that part, I was like, okay, I could see that happening. Like, the way it was written, I could see that happening. But then the governor put a rifle in his hand and it was like, shoot. Like, that was a little bit, like, again, the demographic. And then, again, there's another situation where he gets a hold of a pistol and they're just like, here you go, here's this pistol. And he does not have any clue about guns or gun safety or anything like that. And so it would just, for the demographic and for these 12-year-old characters, that was just a little bit off-putting. And then you have a bunch of the characters like the animal characters smoking and such, and it's like, those aspects did not need to be in here. The fighting and the darker themes are fine, but the drinking and the smoking and then the guns, like, the guns themselves with the fighting, fine. Like, I know that's not for everybody, but that would have been fine in itself if it hadn't been these situations where this 12-year-old was handling these guns. And so, yeah, that's what dropped it down. I almost gave it a 2-star, but I thought I enjoyed the story enough, so I ended up going with 3 stars. But yeah, it is, like, there's just components. And so if you're thinking of this for, like, a middle grade child, I would be hesitant, honestly, if it was my child. I don't have children, but if it was my child, or, like, if I was going to give this book to my nieces, I probably wouldn't if they were at that age. Like, maybe if they're a little bit older, like 8th grade or so. But yeah, just there were some choices the author made that was just no. So there's that one as part of a series. I don't think I'm gonna keep on with the series. I will say, though, if I do come across them, I might, because there are these, like, colored inserts. They're kind of hard to find, but no, there's one. So there's illustrations throughout, but there's also these colored insert illustrations, which are absolutely stunning. The illustrator, fantastic. So there's that one. Then we had, for my genre-a-thon for April, which was basically Easter, to read a Christian fiction, even though Easter was actually in March this year. When I think Easter, I think April. And so I went with The Shack by W.M. Paul Young. And this one, so I read Eve by this author and absolutely loved it. It was more about, like, a witness to creation and such. It was really cool. And this one, the beginning of it, I really, really loved. And kind of the end, I enjoyed as well. It was the middle part that was a little bit rough for me. What I like about this author as a Christian writer is he's very open-minded. So, like, in this, like, God is kind of gender fluid. There's a lot of, like, diversity as far as race and such, which I really, really like that aspect. And he's kind of open-minded about, like, the lessons of the Bible and such. So I really enjoy the way the author writes this. But basically, you have this father, and he's on a camping trip with his 3 kids. His wife is at home, and one of the kids ends up getting kidnapped. They have 5 kids in total, but 2 of them are already grown out of the house. Anyway, so one of the kids ends up getting kidnapped and brutally murdered by this predator. And so, they're kind of struggling. He's really struggling. He's never had a lot of faith in God, but after this incident, he has even less faith. And so he ends up finding this note in his mailbox, and it's telling him to go back to the shack where the body was found. And then he has this whole experience with the Holy Trinity. And so you have God, you have Jesus, and you have the Holy Spirit, and they're kind of represented in different ways. And it was kind of interesting because God presents to him at first as this big black woman, like, very nurturing and, like, feeding him all the time and such. And so there's a lot of, like, discussion between him and these different characters about this tragedy and his own life and such. And how, like, God didn't, like, it wasn't God who did this, and then God didn't prevent it for, X, Y, and Z, like it's, there's free choice among men and such. And so there's really good, and it's not preachy. It's not preachy at all, but it gets very lectury at times and a little bit repetitive because he's having these different conversations with these different characters. And so that's kind of what dropped it down. I still really enjoy this author's writing. I don't know if he has other books. I know this is his most popular one, and like I said, I loved Eve. So like, if he does happen to have other books, I might pick them up because I really find his writing interesting, and I like I said, how open-minded he is about religion. And so yeah, I kind of appreciate that, but the lecturiness of these conversations, and like why bad things happen and such, and why God doesn't prevent them, like it got a little lectury for me, so that's why I only got 3 stars, but I still really enjoyed it. The other one, this one was weird, but anyway, so this one was for Bookworm, and this was debut novel. So this will also go back in, but this was for my ABC title challenge. This was for my and that was I Was Amelia Earhart by Jane Mendelsohn, and it did say this was her first novel. So basically, this is following, so you kind of have a little bit of before the flight and get a little bit of history on Amelia Earhart, and then it's kind of speculative. This wasn't the one that fit for speculative fiction, although I think it could have, but it kind of like alternate history / speculative fiction, but not really. So basically, it leads up to the point where Amelia Earhart disappears, and then it's basically about like what could have happened to her. And so in this book, it's very disjointed, which I don't always mind depending on the book, but in this case, it really didn't work. It was really hard to follow. And so it finally ends up with her and her pilot. They're on this desert island, stranded because, of course, her plane went down and disappeared. And so it's them kind of trying to survive on this desert island. And just the way it ended was kind of weird. It's like, why did they wait till then to make that choice? And then it's kind of, obviously the plane still disappeared. And so it doesn't, go. And so it just kind of ended weird. But it was interesting, I guess, but it's just very disjointed. I think I might keep it and give it a reread and see if maybe I can grasp it a little bit more on a reread. But it was interesting, and like you got a little bit about Amelia Earhart, and I was able to look up a few things just to verify that was true, and so it was kind of interesting. But it just was weird, and so it got 3 stars. Then we had 3 4-stars as well. And so the first one was for the prompt, loved one picked. And my husband gave me a chunker. It was 820 pages or 40 pages or something like that. I'll tell you here. 820 pages. And that is Wizard's First Rule by Terry Goodkind. And this actually did work for Kim from Expedition Through the Pages. Her Tales from Two Trails game, because one of the prompts was there to have somebody else pick you a book. So it's like, great, I already have a book, but it's a chunky one. This wasn't horrible to read, actually. For as chunky as it is, it did read fairly easily. It did take me several days, but overall it did read fairly easily. I didn't fully love it. There's definitely, some things that were like some of the interactions between the main character and this girl were a little bit like when the dialogue was happening was a little bit weird. But and like there's this whole like torture thing that happens that was both interesting but also a little weird. But basically you have like these kingdoms that are separated in 3 parts, and so it's kind of like the Wildwood in that aspect. But anyway, you have these 3 kingdoms. One is non-magical, and there's boundaries in between that things aren't supposed to be able to pass. And so the main character, his father gets brutally murdered. So he's trying to figure out what's happening there. And then he ends up, the boundary things are coming through the boundary, and he's learning things about that. And then there's this girl, and he's up trying to find like clues to maybe what happened to his father, and he sees this girl, and she's being tracked by these 4 men, and so he's like, what's happening? And so he goes to warn the girl, and then it kind of starts this adventure as these people are after him, and they're after him as well, and he doesn't really know why, and so he starts learning, and he has this mentor, and the mentor plays a part in it as well, and so he's starting to learn, and so basically he gets chosen to carry the sword of truth, which you have the Midlands, which is where the girl's from, and then you have this other area, which back in the day there was this guy who was trying to like just take over the world essentially, and the wizards kind of shut him down, but now there's the sun, but the sun is kind of getting followers by like, oh, follow me and everything will be all right. But basically there's these 3 boxes that are put into play, and if he opens one of the boxes he will gain control of the world. So these guys are trying to stop that, and the girl has a secret as well. And so like his power uses anger, which is a little bit weird. I did like, and the girl has a power too, that's a little bit weird, but I did like kind of the duplicity of their powers, because they both have to learn as they go, like that it's not just this how you access your powers. There's the other side of the coin with how you can access your powers as well. And so yeah, there's a lot of interesting characters. I like the dragon at the end. There's this dragon character that was a lot of fun. And so yeah, they're basically just going on this quest to basically try to find this box and stop this guy from rising to power. So there is also, like, it was a lot. The women are all women who get abused basically, which got to be a lot. And then the two, like the dark faction, you not only have the guy that's rising to power and like sacrificing children and shit, you also have his second in command who is a PDF, a head file. And so yeah, that was a lot. And then you have that whole torture scene, which was a lot. And I just don't think it needed to be that much. Like, oh, these guys are bad, they do this. Like, I think it could have been a little less in that aspect. And like I said, some of the interactions were a little weird. I did like there's this little girl, and she is like the playmate to a princess. I really liked her character. And there's like these, what are they called? The mud people or something like that. Those characters were real interesting. So a lot of really interesting characters. But yeah, it was long, and like I think some of the dark aspects were unnecessary at points. But overall I did enjoy it, and I'm glad my husband had me read it, but I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series. I did pull out the second one. It's almost 1,000 pages though. And I'm like, I don't know that I enjoyed it that much. And it's a long series as well. So we'll see. Maybe if it comes up, I'll end up reading it. Next, we have my character prompt, which we got Pooh, which is a classic or a comfort read. I went with the classic route, and I read The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. So this is the 3rd book in the Lord of the Rings series. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I definitely prefer the movies. I'm not like, I prefer the movies. I'm glad I read the books though. It definitely gives you a lot more context, and I think if you do love the movies and you've never read the books, I do think you should read the books. It's just the first part was all about, which this is my least favorite part of the movie too, so it's not just the book. Like, this part of the movie is my least favorite part, but you have Gondor and such, and they're fighting, and I just hate that whole battle section. And at least in the movie though, it's broken up by Frodo and Sam, where in this one you have that part, then you have Frodo and Sam's part, and so you don't get that back and forth, which I kind of like how it's laid out that way, but at the same time, it was also a bit rough to get through. And so the first section of this book I really struggled with, but once it got to Sam and Frodo's part, even as dark as that is, like I was like, okay, I'm I like this part. And so yeah, all of these have been 4 stars for me. They are a bit long-winded, and there were times, like, especially the dialogue between the human characters for whatever reason, like, not even the other characters, but the human characters, didn't understand what they were saying. Like, well, can you speak a little plainer? Because I don't know what you mean. But luckily I had the reference from the movie, so I kind of knew what was going on. So yeah, I gave it 4 stars just because it was a little bit of a struggle to get through, but I'm really, really glad I read it. Like I said, if you are a fan of the movies, I do think you should read the books just to get a little bit more of that context for sure. Let's see, and then my last 4 star, I ended up using a reward for this so I could forgo a honey jar prompt, and that prompt was the Brothers Grimm. I just did not want to do anything related to that. And so I ended up choosing Jewel of the Nile for this one by Tessa Afshar. This is another Christian writer, and I read Pearl in the Sand, I think it was, and absolutely loved it. Again, I think as Christian writers go, this one's very accessible. This one didn't fully lean into, oh, just find God and everything will be all right, but it kind of felt like that way at some points, and so that's why it kind of dropped it down for me. But basically, you have Charlene, and she's orphaned as a baby, ends up being raised by her aunt, and they go for 2 weeks every year to visit her grandfather, who is a Roman general, and he's stationed in Kush. And so she knows that she doesn't know who her father is, but she knows he's likely Kushite because of her skin color and such. And so she ends up overhearing her grandfather talking and learns that her father's alive. And so she ends up going on this journey to learn who her father is and where he is. And so she ends up going on the ship to go to Rome. And so you kind of have this stowaway aspect. There is a point where the captain of the ship ends up being like a caretaker for her because she gets very, very ill, which I really like that. So you have this romance as well. And it did get like kind of his fears and insecurities along with hers did get a little bit like redundant at some points. And it's like I wish that had been a little bit smoother, and then like I said, kind of that faith aspect was a little bit more heavy, and it was really prevalent in the other one too, because it's kind of biblical fiction as well. The other one more so than this one, and so it is really, really present in the books. But the other one, it wasn't like in your face. Like it made sense for the story, and it does kind of work because in these time periods, like religion and faith were very much more prevalent than like nowadays. But it did, like I said, it didn't fully because they all have their problems. So it didn't fully lean into like, oh, just find God and everything will be okay. But it definitely leaned that way. And so yeah, I did still really, really enjoy it. I love this author's writing. If you're looking for a good Christian writer that does like biblical fiction and such, and like historical, this is a great one to pick up. Like fantastic. And I definitely plan on picking up more from this author. Then we ended up having 9 5-stars. So definitely, like I said, a great month, even though we started off with DNFs and such and had some lower ratings. Like the majority were 5 stars and really, really worked. And so the first was actually my genre-thon pick for March. I ended up not getting to it, so I did roll it over, and it was supposed to be a psychological thriller, and I went with The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. This was honestly probably more of a 4-star, but I just really found it easy to like get into. And it kept me really engaged, which I read this fairly soon after my DNFs. I had read, the replacement books before this one, but fairly soon. So it was just kind of nice to just get into it. And the thing about this one is I had seen the movie, so I kind of had a reference. And I still found myself questioning this character. So I thought the author did that really well, and I really, really enjoyed the duplicity, because the main character is also a psychiatrist, psychologist, one of those. I always get those mixed up. She's, that was her profession. Um, but now she's on the other side of that. And so I really liked how you had that, because like she knew, like the clinical aspects of this, but she was also still struggling with this. And so I really thought the author did that well. So basically in this one, you have the main character, and a event happened in her life, and so she has agoraphobia and is just basically homebound in her apartment, and she watches her neighbors and such, and this family moves in across the street, and she thinks she sees the mom getting murdered, and calls the police and such, and it just kind of spirals from there. But she also drinks a lot, and then she's on all these medications, for her trauma and such, and so nobody really believes her. And then she even starts questioning herself, and you're questioning her. And like I said, I've seen the movies, so I kind of had a frame of reference, and I still found myself questioning things. And so I don't know, I ended up enjoying this. I was so hesitant. I didn't think I was gonna enjoy this as much as I ended up doing. So there is that one. Then let's see here. Then we had an audiobook, which was The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and this was narrated by Donald Sutherland. And so this was the group read for Kim from Expedition Through Pages, Tales from Two Trails. This was the choice for the group read. And so I was like, I know I'm not gonna want to get a physical copy. And when I found a edition narrated by Donald Sutherland, I was like, yes. There's just something, like, I'm not like, it's not that I love Donald Sutherland or anything like that. I think there's just something about like these actors and such that you have been in your life through so many years. Like there's just kind of like a familiarity there. And I thoroughly enjoyed listening to Donald Sutherland narrate this story. I don't think it would have gotten as high if I hadn't listened to the audiobook, because it is very slow. It is a bit repetitive. But yeah, I ended up listening to it when I went to the grocery store, and it was probably one of the better grocery shopping experiences that I've had. I really struggle with grocery shopping, and I just had that in, and I was listening to it. And so basically there's this battle between him and this fish, and it's kind of this battle of wills. And then there's this component where he had mentored this boy, but he hasn't caught a fish in a while, so the boy ends up moving on. But I really liked how the boy was still a part of helping this old man, and taking care of him and such. I really like that aspect, and just kind of this battle of wills, and like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And like having Donald Sutherland, a voice you're very familiar with, I really enjoyed it. So there is that one. Then we had my replacement for going local. And I looked on my shelves to see what else I had thrifted, and I had this one, Gunslinger Girl by Lindsay Eli, probably Eli. Um, and this one surprised me again. So it's basically dystopian meets Old West meets like Vegas. And like meets like kind of like sideshow characters as well. And so basically you have the main character, Pity. Serendipity is her name, but everybody calls her Pity. I think that's what everybody calls her anyway. Yeah, Pity. And her mom has died, and her mom was like a sharpshooter and taught her how to shoot and such. And so her father's basically, there's again kind of two factions. And so you have like these communes and such, and the women, if they're able to have babies, get used in that capacity, because not all the women are fertile. And so her father's gonna send her off to be married, and so she decided to run away. and she ends up at this place which is kind of on the edge, and it's kind of the Wild West, lawless and such. But there is a ruler who it's her laws, but there's also like gangs and whatnot. And so she ends up going and gets put into the sideshow. But there's also a little bit of political upheaval as well. And that kind of ends up coming to a head within the story. And yeah, I found it really, really interesting. It was fun, and I had a good time with it. So I like that sideshow angle. So she's like, kind of like the Wild West show or whatever, but there's different components. Like there's a woman who can charm the snakes and such. There's people who throw knives, and it's like kind of deadly, like death-defying stunts and such. But yeah, I really actually enjoyed this overall. I had a fun time with it, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I can see myself rereading that one. Then we had a digital book, and this was for the autism uh, acceptance readathon. And this one was Sensory Life on the Spectrum, and it's a comic. But this one was a host recommendation, but I used it for the nonfiction prop. And I just overall really enjoyed it. So it's just this anthology of different autistic creators. And so you have a lot of different art styles and such, and a lot of different focus. Like some focus on kind of what it's like in their inner mind, and some focus on stimming and things. And I like that there was tips and tricks for like dealing with burnout or how unhealthy stims and things like that. Like it wasn't just like the experience, there was also helpful information in there as well. And I think it's worth it whether you are autistic, you know somebody who's autistic, or you just want to know more about what it's like to be autistic. I do think this one's a great one to pick up. And like I said, there was just a lot of different art styles and such, and I had a really good time with it, even though comics and graphic novels aren't my first choice. And it was a little weird because this was digital, but in a way I kind of like that, because some ones I could like zoom in on basically, and so that was kind of cool. And then let's see here. Then my next book, I replaced the How Hard Can It Be for my H title, and I went with Hattie Big Sky by Kirby Larson. This was actually in my most recent haul. And again, I was just looking for something with H, and I was like, ooh, I just picked that one up. Let's give it a try. And I ended up absolutely loving this one. So this one, is it World War One? Maybe I want to say, or it might be two. No, it has to be one. I think it's World War One. But anyway, I don't know. One of the world wars. So basically, you have Hattie, and she's going to be sent to basically a workhouse for orphan girls, and she's with her uncle, and his wife doesn't like her, and so she wants to send her off. Well, she ends up finding out she had this other uncle on her mom's side, and he sends her this letter that he's giving her his claim in Montana. And so she ends up going to Montana, and she has to prove out this claim. Of course, she has no clue what she's doing. And her neighbors, this German couple, well, the male's German, ends up befriending her and really, really helping her out. But with the war and everything, there's a lot of tension there. And there's this family that are more powerful, and they want her land, and then they're also kind of prejudiced against the Germans, and so they're basically like, you're friends with them, like it's not safe for you to be friends with them. And she's like, why? Like they're my friends and they're helping me out, like. And so basically it's her journey trying to prove this claim in Montana, and then like the prejudice against this German couple that are her neighbors and her friends, and then the power struggle with this big powerful family that are trying to get the land and such. And so yeah, it was really interesting. And it also has like, he was a friend, not really a sweetheart, but by the end it kind of turns that direction. And so he's overseas, and so they're sending letters. And I liked how it was like the letters would get crossed, and so like she wouldn't get a letter that had been sent a while ago, and so that component there, like, it really felt like, because like sometimes it would be like all kind of jumbled up and not in order, but it felt real to the story. And I just kind of like that component, and you see their kind of relationship build through these letters while he's over at the war. And there is a second one. I've heard it's not as good as this one, but I still would really like to get it and to read it. So yeah, I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. And let's see here. So my replacement books were fantastic, since the other two I DNF'd. Then we have another one that was an extra for the Autism Acceptance Readathon, and that was The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. And so this is the third book in the series. They are more companion novels. You can definitely read them separately. Like the characters, are the same, but they don't play like a huge role. And so you can read this one without having read the other ones. And so yeah, basically you have Anna, and she's a violinist, and she kind of has this YouTube video that ends up going viral. And then she starts experiencing burnout, and she does not know she's autistic. And so she gets diagnosed, like she's struggling, and she ends up getting diagnosed. And then you have Quan, who is the cousin of the guy from the first book and the brother of the guy from the second book. And the guy in the second book like barely makes an appearance in here. And so yeah, you have him, and he had a little health thing, and so he's kind of struggling. Her boyfriend ends up telling her he wants an open relationship before he proposes to her, just to make sure that she's really the one. And so they plan on having a one night stand. Like, neither one wants any strings attached. He just kind of wants to get back on the horse after his health struggle. And she's just like, well, if he's going to go experiment, like, I'm going to too. And it just, because of her trauma, like, she has a lot of anxiety and such. And then he has some anxiety and such. And so the one night stand just keeps getting pushed off, and we'll try again. And it's really cute. And like, in their first date, they end up watching, like, they're each at their own homes, but they're watching this octopus documentary, which was really, really adorable. I absolutely love that component of it. And like the nature documentaries they watched throughout the book was really fun. Well, something happens to Anna's father, and so she ends up having to go and be a caretaker. So that's a trigger warning for you. Definitely keep that in mind before picking this up. And she's just really, really struggling, and she doesn't understand why. And her therapist brings up autism, and then her family, specifically her sister, just kind of dismisses it. And so she's just struggling, and she doesn't, like, she feels bad because, she's trying to help her family and trying to help her dad, but she's having all these negative thoughts, and she's just about to implode, essentially. And so I really, really like that aspect as well. I read some reviews where they were mad because the romance aspect wasn't there, but it was more about their relationship. It wasn't straight to, the intimate scenes or anything like that. It was really kind of a slow build because they both had their different issues and such. And so I think that's why people, like, those reviews were like mad about it. But honestly, romance is more than just physical, and I actually really, really appreciated that component and how they built, like, through the struggles in each other's lives. Like, and honestly, like, if this was a real scenario, like, that would have been set up for the relationship to not go any further. And one thing I really, really appreciated it, because it was supposed to just be a one night stand, when their feelings started to change, like, there was no miscommunication there. Like, Quan in particular, like, that man, like, I don't really subscribe to the whole book boyfriend thing, but if I were to, it'd be this one, because he just immediately, like, put it out on the table. He didn't play any games, like, or anything like that, or get mad. He just said, hey, I know we had this kind of arrangement, but my feelings have changed, and I would like to pursue a relationship. And I just, she kind of plays games a little bit, but it's not because she's playing games. It's more because of family pressure and such. So yeah, I absolutely love this. Definitely my favorite of the series for sure. And I really, 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 really love that one. So there's that. And it honestly would have been higher, but these next three books were also fantastic. And so the next one is another one that I used for the Autism Acceptance Readathon. And this one was for the indie owned voices, and this was also the pick for Autism Reads, which again is by Christine at Autistic Reader, and that was Dark Apprentice by Val Neal. This one was so good. So I really wish that it had followed more of Medea, who is the autistic character, but it's really following, I forget his name, but the main male character, it's really following his point of view for the most part, and he's a psychopath. And, so I didn't like him. Like, I obviously, psychopath, but there were, like, redeeming moments for him. And that really helped. And I think with Medea and such, it like really worked. And so basically he wants to practice dark magic and he's trying to get an apprenticeship. But there's kind of this, I can't remember. My brain is, but there's basically like this overseeing faction, and they have a school and they don't really teach much to the students. And so he wants to do an apprenticeship and he ends up finding Medea, but she doesn't want to take on any more apprentices because every time she does, they try to kill her and they end up dying. And so she's like, I don't want any more apprentices. They always die. I just don't want to do it. And he's like, I promise, like, I won't kill you. Like, and if I do decide I'm going to try to kill you, like, I'll try to make sure, like, I'm up to snuff. Like, I'm not just gonna go right off the bat. But he has an overinflated ego, so this whole time, like, she's trying to teach him, and she maybe doesn't communicate the best, and she really struggles because interaction again, and it really burns her out, and so then they're kind of, like, forced proximity, they're living in the same area and such. But he kind of thinks he knows, and so when she tries to teach him something, he either sees it as pointless or whatever, and so he doesn't learn his lessons very well. There's a lot of growth in Medea throughout the book, and this is a series, so there is a second one, and there's a lot of growth for her character throughout the book, and she's open to trying different things and such to really make this work, but he thinks he's right. He doesn't see the point, and yada yada yada, so it causes a lot of problems. And she keeps like, you made the problem, you fix it. And so yeah, and he thinks that she's poisoning him and such. And so there's this curse that he needs to break and such, but he thinks it's her and it's not. And it's a really, really good time. And I like that component of you have that autistic character, but then you also have the psychopath. And I was like, would that be considered a neurodivergent character as well? And I saw like two different camps, but it is a different way of thinking. Like, so yeah, it was just really, really interesting, and I really had a great time with it. Then these next two were neck and neck, honestly. So this second place I ended up giving to this one, and this was Cursed to be an Animal. There's nobody that's cursed to be an animal in this, but they do have enchanted animals. And that's a hard one to fulfill. But just kind of that animal that's more, because, Swan Princess, it's a swan, but she's actually human. And so the enchanted animal aspect, and there's golems in here, and so that aspect worked for me. And this is This Dark Descent by Kalyn Josephson. Again, this was a gift to me from Marianna, and I absolutely love this. Like I said, between this one and the next one, I didn't know which was first place. And this one, I'm still upset with how it ended. Like, I cannot wait for the second one to come out. Like, the way it ended, like, it really just, like, I'm upset about it. Like, I am really upset. It made sense for it to end that way, but the characters are not okay, and I'm upset about it. And so, yeah, basically, you have, what's her name? Kira, and her family breeds enchanted horses. And then her father ends up getting taken, and so she makes this deal and enters this race, which has 4 components, I believe. And it's basically a race to the death. So it's a deadly race, and a lot of people die during it. And each time, like, you start off with so many riders, and then it gets cut in half, and then half again, and then just the top 10 go on to the final leg. And there's different magic that might pop up and such, and then the other riders are trying to kill you. And so she makes this deal to try to basically get her father back and save her ranch. And she needs help, and so enter Ariel, who creates golems, and then there's a bunch of noble houses, and his name is Damien. And so there's kind of this power struggle with the, like, the way the family works is there's kind of a competition between them as well, and then whoever wins that competition becomes head of the family, essentially. And there's different royal houses, and then there's there's the main royal house, the 4 upper royal houses, and then like 8 lower royal houses. And so he tries to help her out, and he has beef with the nobility that took her father. And so it just kind of makes sense. So there's a little bit of like found family aspect there as well. I mean, she has her family, but like really close friendship. And some of the other characters, like Ariel, the one that creates the golem, she definitely finds her family. It's a found family situation for her. And yeah, so you have them racing and the political upheaval and power struggle, and like all the deadliness of the games and such, and the horse aspect, of course. Anything animal related, horse related, I'm gonna love. And then I don't really typically like go for deadly competition type books, but I guess when it's a horse race, it works for me, and I absolutely love that component. And you definitely have morally gray characters like this, Damien, who's helping her. It's like, is he a good guy? Is he not? Like, is he trying to do good? And Ariel definitely makes some questionable choices as well. And then you also have another character, which is sort of Kira's love interest, but nothing really develops there. Like, it's that potential, which I always like that when there's just that potential, and you're like, are they? And there ends up being sort of a love triangle there as well. And yeah, I just loved everything about this book. I really wish the other one was already out because I cannot wait to read it. And so yeah, absolutely love this. So thank you again, Marianna, because this was off my wish list. You picked the perfect one, probably one of the ones I was most excited about for sure. So there's that one. And then the last one I ended up giving the top space to. This was for the prompt of Rabbit, and it was Autumn Harvest. And for this one, I went with Kindred, by Octavia E. Butler. It doesn't take place in the autumn, it takes place more summer. But I figured, she's on a plantation and they're harvesting things, and so it worked for that prompt. And yeah, obviously this is a very popular author, very popular book, and I had found it at their store a little while ago, and I was like, I'm really interested in trying the author and the book. I didn't realize it was written in the 70s, I think it was. I didn't realize that. I did read, there's like a little introduction by Robert Crossley that I ended up reading. Yeah, 1979 was when it was first published, and this edition was published in 88. And I didn't realize that, like, as popular as it is, it just didn't clue in. And like, this book, like, so impactful, so good. And really reading the introduction, and it's talking about, the slavery narrative, like, now that we're so many years past that, you don't really get that first-hand perspective, and this is written in that way where it's that first-hand perspective, and with the travel aspect, like, really, really, really good. And so basically you have the main character, and she keeps getting pulled back to like 1819, I want to say. And there's this tie to her ancestor who's actually a white man, boy man. And so she gets pulled back the first time when he was a boy, and his life is in danger, and she keeps getting pulled back anytime his life is in danger. Um, and so, yeah, she just goes and she saves him, but then she sometimes, like, the amount of time she spends on the plantation back in 1819 varies. And so she ends up becoming, part of the slaves, essentially. And her and this boy kind of have an understanding, but obviously his father's running the plantation. And just so good. And I really liked, like, at one point her husband does get pulled back with her, and that dual perspective, because he's one white, two a man. And she's a black woman, and so you have that dual perspective, and he's like he's not a bad man, and he loves her and he sees the problems, but he still doesn't fully understand. And so I really kind of like that. Like, it's all from her perspective, but the conversation between them, it's like you truly don't get it, and oh, it's so good. So that ended up being my top book. And as far as my top 3 go, again, these don't always correlate with the star ratings, but in this case they did. So my number 1 spot did go to Kindred, and that was the time travel aspect. I haven't read a lot of time travel books, but the ones I have read, like, I thoroughly enjoy time travel, apparently. And so I really like that aspect. The slavery narrative, again, like, it's being told from that first person perspective, and even her as a woman, like, there was still prejudice and such in 1976 or whatever. Like, even their families had a problem with them being married to each other, being in an interracial relationship. But even from her perspective, like, she didn't fully get it either. Like, she's like, yeah, I've seen people be beat on movies and such, but until I experienced it or had somebody being beat right there in front of me and I can smell the sweat and the blood, and, like, oh, it just paints a picture. The female slash white male slash female, white slash black perspective, and then also that family aspect. I love books that have, like, that um genealogy line, and, like, have the ancestors and such. I always typically like that, and so I really enjoyed that. And it does play a part with how she's initially treated, both by this white family and the other slaves. It plays a part, and such. So, like, and it plays a part with her and how she keeps saving him. I mean, there's a reason for that too. Obviously, he's her ancestor, something needs to happen, but kind of her, like, how she keeps forgiving him even though he's doing these atrocious things. Like, just really, there's a lot of depth to this book. Then number 2, of course, is This Dark Descent. Again, enchanted animals. There's other enchanted animals. There's an enchanted cat, which I really loved. And she creates other golems and such. So, or it's a golem cat. But there's other enchanted horses, and there's just, I love the enchanted animals. The Deadly Race, I really like that component. Morally gray characters, because, like, do you like them? Do you not? And then the family and friendship aspect, like, just, I really like the different dynamics between the family, and that friendship. Like, it's sort of found family. Like I said, the main character has her family, so it's more about the friendships for her, because she kind of has her place. But Ariel ends up having that found family aspect, so that was really good. And so, yeah, that's why that one got number 2. And then the third one, actually, I gave to The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, again narrated by Donald Sutherland. And again, top reason why is the narration. Like, it was such a good listen. I like that battle of wills, and, like, sometimes I was rooting for the old man, sometimes I was rooting for the fish. Like, I was all over the place. I didn't know who I was rooting for. The value of age, like, it really shows, like, he's old and he hasn't caught a fish in ages, but he's still going out there and he's still trying his hardest. And he still has, the wisdom to teach this young boy and such. And then that friendship component, and this boy, like, he didn't just, oh, you're again, it kind of goes back to that value of age too. Like, he didn't just say, well, you're old, you haven't caught a fish, you have nothing else to teach me, so I'm going to move on and I'm not going to worry about you anymore. Like, he would come back and check on this old man, and after the battle with the fish, he took care of this old man and such. So I really like that component as well. And so yeah, that's it. I did end up hauling a lot of books. Most of those were from the thrift store. I did haul some others to like do complete series and such. And so I think I ended up hauling 68 books total. And then you would have already seen it, but I also have a bunch of books. I'm going to be unhauling 136 books, probably plus these two. Honestly, I might just go ahead and throw them in there because I haven't taken them yet. So I did clear some space on my shelves and such, but yeah. That was my month. I know this video is long. My wrap-ups tend to be long. I personally like longer videos. But let me know if you've read any of these, if you're interested in reading any of these, what your favorite book from April was, anything. If you don't have anything to say and you just want to support me and let me know you were here, you can always leave either a rabbit or any type of animal down in the comments below. Maybe a rabbit or a horse this month for this dark descent. But yeah, just let me know you were here, and I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.